Hello there, Alan Plum here again with a little more from Shed Engineering. And finally we've made some progress on the N-gauge road system. So I'm pretty chuffed at the moment. First, I must say a big thank you to everyone for all their comments and suggestions. Most appreciated. Now, it'd be wrong of me to pick any one out in particular because there was several along the same lines, but it did get me thinking in a different direction, and that's, as I say, very much appreciated. Now, without going into too much detail and wasting too much time, I tried all sorts of different things. A lot of what I've done has been modified and used 2 or 3 times, but I wanted it pretty small, obviously, to fit inside a barn, so the mechanism was hidden. So I was starting off with something small, and when I had a small winding drum, I had the transit tubes coming in opposite each other, but it was slipping. So I wanted to wrap it round an extra once to try and get some grip, and so the winding drum would move the chain. At that time I was using the red ball chain, but then it started tangling up, so I purposefully separated the transit tubes, one to the left, one to the right, in the hope that it would wrap around and feed out off the drum again, but that didn't work. I then tried a much bigger drum, hoping that the surface area would work, but again it still intended to tangle up. I then swapped to this curb chain. I think it's called curb chain, which is a much flatter chain, because I was going for the idea of like mangled rollers, where you'd have 2 rollers and the chain trapped between them. So that's what we've got here. We've got a roller at the top made out of rubber with a cogwheel fastened on the outside, and another roller at the bottom that's got neoprene rubber, a softer rubber, fastened around it, again with a gear wheel, so they're both connected together. It's a lot bigger mechanism that I wanted, but I couldn't make the rollers any smaller. These are the only 2 gears I had that was suitable, but at least I thought, if I start off at this size, then I've got quite a lot of surface area for the chain to grip onto the rollers. And it might be better to just do a little diagram to explain. Now, when I had a very small winding drum, what I was trying to do is get the chain to come in, wrap around the winding drum, and then go back out again. And obviously to do that I had to put some tension on the chain. Now, I never actually gained anything, because every time I put tension on the chain, I was increasing the friction inside the transit tube, going all the way around the layout, and so on all them corners I was creating friction. And so if I put 1 pound of tension on the chain, then I was putting 1 pound of tension round all these corners, 9 foot of chain inside the tube, and so that's why I was never getting anywhere. So I then decided on something similar to a mangle. For the younger generation who probably don't even know what a mangle is, it's what they used to dry clothes with, putting them through rubber rollers. Now, the idea was that the chain will come in over the top, through the rollers, round and back out, so you've got like a letter S. That way, if this roller is turning, you're getting some friction and adhesion around that area there. If the rollers are connected together, then also you're getting some adhesion around there, so you've got quite a lot of surface area, and in theory it'll pull in either direction. Now, I thought it important that while I was turning this roller, this one had to turn as well, and so that's why I've used the two plastic cogwheels to gear them together. But then we still had the problem that we're going to have a loose chain, and so we had to have a little bit of tension on it, but not too much to create a lot of friction inside the 9 foot of tubing. So imagine a derailleur gear on a racing bike. You've got the two sprockets, but then the whole thing is pivoted. So I thought, if I can pivot it at this point here and have the whole thing in something like a little box, then it can pivot in this direction and in this direction, and as it does that, it will obviously take up some of the slack, and so that's what I've basically ended up with, and it's working very well at the moment. So this is the little box with the rollers mounted inside, and it's pivoting on the winding handle, and so that's why I say it's very much like a derailleur gear. And if you can look at the chain down in the bottom there, it's completely slack, and then as it comes across this way, it's got a little bit of tension on it. So as I say, I can get a little bit of tension, but not too much that it's going to create a huge amount of friction all the way down that tubing. And so then when we wind it, we can just have a little bit of tension, so I can get a rubber band or spring on that, and it's working very nicely. The bottom axle here for the bottom roller was drilled in the wrong place. It's very, very critical. I mean, we're probably talking 3/4 of a millimetre, something like that, and it wasn't tight enough up against this one so that it was nipping the chain. So I actually filed the hole out, so I ended up with an oval hole. But then to keep the axle pushed up where I wanted it, I've just used some 2-part putty and drilled some little holes round, pushed the putty in so it went into the holes, and that's like created a bearing, actually pushing this up towards this axle here. So that got me out of a bit of a tight spot, and there you might be able to see the putty supporting that bottom axle again, because I drilled it too far apart. Filed it out, pushed it up, wrapped that putty around it, and that pushed the two rollers further together so that it's actually gripping. And because we've got a nice big surface area, and that new flat chain instead of the ball chain obviously sits on the rollers quite nicely. When we reverse, it swings this way, and that's where I just need some kind of spring just to hold it and keep the tension on the chain. Something's clicking somewhere, I don't know what that is. We'll sort that out. So as you can see, we're gradually making some progress. I just wish that I'd got some of my old Meccano parts and gears, because then I think that would have been a lot easier. As I was trying to explain, I drilled the hole there for the bottom axle and bottom roller just no more than a millimetre too low down, and obviously the rollers weren't nipping together. If I'd got a few gears and what have you from the Meccano, I think it would have been a lot simpler. Obviously, as well, the whole mechanism is much bigger than I envisaged or wanted, but the size of the rollers were determined by the two plastic gears that I'd got, so that was my only option, and I thought it better to have larger rollers and at least getting it working. Like I explained again, with a larger roller you've got more surface area, so I thought, well, if we can get it working with that size and at least it's working, then there's a possibility that I can rebuild the mechanism and perhaps make it a little bit smaller. Now, because the rollers are so big, I mean a little bit bigger than I'd actually like, then the angle of the chain coming off the rollers into the transit tubes is quite severe, and that's the clicking noise you can hear as the chain is entering the tube at quite a severe angle. Also, the mechanism is now going to take some hiding. I'd got this vision that we'd have an old ramshackle barn, and the tractor would come out of one end, trundle around the fields and go back in the other end of the barn. Well, with the mechanism as big as it is, I don't think that's going to be possible. I think it's going to have to come out of a barn, trundle around, and then it's going to have to come back into either a separate shed or between some hay bales or park up, something like that. As you can see from this next clip, it does a 3-point turn quite nicely, so it can come back into like a farmyard and simply do a 3-point turn and then go back out again. You will have also no doubt noticed that the ends of the transit tubes are at quite a steep angle now, so I'm going to have to adjust the landscape to try and accommodate that, so the farmyard might be on 2 different levels for argument's sake, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I must really try and stress that I'm really pushing the limits here. The tube is virtually 9 foot long, and as you can see there's a lot of severe bends on it. And I've mentioned it before, if you're just working on a flat surface in a goods yard or station car park or a factory car park, something like that, or a small street scene, then I don't think you'd have the problems that I'm having. I think you'd have a lot more success. And I think the other mistake I've made is trying to get that tube as small as possible. If I'd have gone with the next size up, it would have been much easier. But again, one of my problems was trying to lay it into the landscape, and because there's so many undulations and contours, to try and get a thicker tube to lay flat was proving very difficult. That's why I chose the thinner tube. But in hindsight, then that ball chain with the nice little connectors didn't fit, and obviously that created problems as well. So as I say, I think if you were doing something a lot simpler, because obviously this is for cameo situations like I envisage for the coal yard, with the lorry just coming over the bridge into the station car park. This is pushing the limits. But as you can see, both the tractor and this little lorry are managing to trundle up and down quite happily, and it's working better than it has done before. And both of them are capable of doing a 3-point turn, even in quite dangerous places such as this. I don't think Dave would ever attempt to turn around on a hillside like that. I still need to try and weather the transit tube. I have tried rubbing some paint on it before, but that doesn't seem to have stuck. I was wondering about a drop of vinegar or something like that to oxidize the copper tube. Is it verdigris when it turns green? I think if it was greenish, that would sort of blend in and not be quite so noticeable. And now that the chain is a brass chain, that might also turn green, because when you're directly over it and you've got a strong light on it, you can see the chain moving, and that catches your eye. Obviously some of the jerkiness is from where the sandpaper or tube is just hitting some small lumps or imperfections, but where I've got it nice and smooth, it seems to be operating nicely. This is quite nice, the way it backs up and reverses up to this corner. Sometimes you get that kind of effect where it does start to lift, but that's acceptable for me. And there she goes, chugging up the hill, turning off into the field. And I think again, when you remember this as N scale and just how small it is, then I think that's tremendous. I must do something about that wall. There is another video, a proof of concept video, showing this road system with a 00 vehicle, a 00 pickup truck, and with 00 obviously it's far better because the wheels are much bigger, and so the vehicles roll along a lot smoother. I must do something about that wall. So if you're thinking about having a go, then I'm sure 00 is a lot easier, and then obviously you can have a thicker transit tube as well. So here it comes up the road into the field, heading up towards the barn. We just need to hide that ugly contraption. Right, here we are looking at the two sidings that would be serving the coal merchants. And at the back there we've got the platform, the two sidings, and I've also got a little bit of a road system coming down between the two lines. So there we've got the coal lorry coming down the yard, and here it actually crosses the tracks and goes on its way up towards the goods shed. He's obviously forgotten something, so he's on his way back, but then luckily he spots a loco coming down, and so waits for the loco to pass by, and if he can get it into first gear he can manage to get over the lines and down beside the loco. Oops a daisy. There we go. Let's just try again. Oops, not quite. Third time lucky. Yes, there we go. Now the reason that it's a little bit rough is because I'm still working on the surface of the yard. I didn't want to use ballast, and I'll go into that in more detail in the next video. But the covering that I am using, the filler that I am using on the yard, still needs sanding down and some more work. But here again you can see the loco coming through, and then the lorry crossing the lines and coming down, and as you can see it's still very rough and uneven in places. Now I'm demonstrating here with the coal lorry, but this section is where I envisaged that the tractor would be used to pull the wagons backwards and forwards. But considering how rough the surface is, then I'm quite pleased. It's showing some promise. Oh, flipping heck! Oh, goodness me! I think we better have some safety training on this yard. Well, after that near miss, I think we better call it a day. So thank you again to everyone who put forward suggestions. That's been a great help. It got me thinking in a far better direction to solve the problem of the winding gear. As always, thank you to all the new subscribers, that's very much appreciated, and remember, if you want updates, click the little cogwheel next to the subscribe banner. We'll talk about the goods yard surface next time round, and I hope you found something of interest, and as always, many thanks for watching.